Welcome to this latest Knoca learning call, where we're going to be focusing on the Spanish Citizens' Assembly for the Climate. As a couple of my Spanish colleagues know, my Spanish is terrible, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce the Spanish title. I'll leave that to one of the participants. Please, you can put questions at any time in the chat, and we'll try and pick them up as the call goes on, and we hope to leave a decent space at the end in order for questions and answers. So just briefly, let me just say a couple of words about the Spanish Climate Assembly. We'll develop this more as we go through the call. The Assembly, as far as I understand it, and I may be corrected, came out of a declaration of a climate emergency by the government, which included a commitment to hold a climate assembly in 2020. Between November 2021 and May 2022, the Climate Assembly met. It was asked to deal with the question, or the statement, a safer and fairer Spain in the face of climate change. How do we do it? Which actually introduced the issue of adaptation, whereas most assemblies up to now have been on mitigation. The Spanish one clearly had adaptation in mind as well. 100 participants were selected with a number of alternates, 10 of which were brought into the process but before weekend 3. The public were unusually invited to contribute to selection of the themes. The Assembly worked over 6 weekends plus a preparatory weekend, preparatory session, and it worked across 5 areas of life, which we'll talk about more as we go through, and produced probably so far the largest number of recommendations from any assembly. So Spain wins on the number of recommendations so far, of 172 recommendations. So to talk with me today about the Spanish Assembly, we're joined by a number of people. We've had a couple of dropouts, unfortunately, due to family illness. Firstly, we have, I'll just go through them and then we'll get into the call. We've got Cristina Gonzalez Onandia, who comes from the Biodiversity Foundation, which is part of the Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenges, which was the main sponsor of the Assembly. We're then joined by Leire Elhazaz from the Spanish Network for Sustainable Development, and María José Sanz from the Basque Centre for Climate Change, who were part of the coordination panel of the Assembly, and Conchi Piñeiro from the facilitation team. We were really hoping to, we were looking forward to talking to Teresa Solana also from the Ministry, and Eva Saldana from Greenpeace Spain, but at the last minute, both of them have had to withdraw for personal family reasons, and we're very sorry to not have their involvement. But as I say, we have a great group of people with us here. Well, let's get on with finding out a bit more about the Assembly. So initially, I'd like to bring Cristina into the space to talk a little bit about the motivation, the government and Ministry's motivation behind the Assembly. So if we could spotlight Cristina, thank you. Welcome, Cristina, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you as for inviting us.
Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your personal role in the Assembly, and then we'll just talk a little bit about the motivation. What did you do as part of the process?
As part of the process, both the Ministry and we from the Biodiversity Foundation, we just support the whole infrastructure and gave make it happen. It was the word that I will use. So we were just backwards. We didn't interfere in any kind of process. That's the main part of the governance panel. And we just make and provide everything they need so everything happened with any kind of political and technical interference from our side. Okay. So that was our role.
And resources, I assume, and a bit of
exactly financial resources, which are also important, but not only financial, but also so many heads there and human resources that also are needed in these kind of processes that you need. It's the backstage. Yeah, we were absolutely. The whole time in backstage, and helping as much as we could, because it was a very important process.
Yeah, no, I'm one of those people who actually understand how much work is involved in these things, so I really appreciate that. So can you tell us a little bit about why the Spanish government decided to commission the Assembly? What was its motivation?
Motivation. Well, the main one was the clear political commitment of the government to strengthen the existing participatory mechanisms and provide citizens with the opportunity to engage in an innovative way, especially in Spain, in the debate on how to tackle climate change. As you already said before, this commitment was reflected on one of the 5 priority areas of the Climate and Environmental Emergency Declaration adopted in January 2020, as you already said, and afterwards it was included into the Climate and Energy Transition Law, which is very important. The main motivation of the Spanish government was to open a new challenge for public participation and engagement in climate change as a means to create a public awareness and participation. We all know that the transition towards a climate neutral and resilient world requires profound changes and affects society at large. It will be unthinkable to undertake them without a broad social conscious and intense public participation. We already know from different studies that Spanish population is not only aware of the reality of climate change, but also they support the development of ambitious public policies. But we wanted to know how. And the Assembly presents and has to represent an opportunity to engage citizens in how to collaborate and intervene to address this social challenge among all.
Okay, and so what was your expectation from the Assembly? What did the government hope would come out of it, and the kind of impact that you hoped it would have?
Well, the main expectations were first to socialize the climate and energy framework, bring it closer to citizens, and generate knowledge around solutions and proposals to implement it. Then include the views of ordinary citizens in climate change debate, which is not very often, and produce a set of recommendations set based on their views and to convey them to local, regional, and national authorities.
Okay, so you now have your 172 recommendations, which is a lot of recommendations. So I'm just wondering, how is the government responding to that? How is what promises has it made, and what sort of processes have you put in place in order to, if you like, review those? I'm assuming there's a review process going on at the moment.
Well, we are already in the middle of this process. We have taken several steps. Recommendations first were presented to the President of the government only 2 weeks after the recommendations were adopted in this 6th meeting you said. Then they were sent to the Council of Ministries, where the whole government decide 2 things: not only to formally send the recommendations to the Parliament, but also to assess and study the recommendations in the respective ministries to see if it's possible to implement those under their responsibilities, not only one ministry, but all of them. We also, as recommendations were also presented to the Parliament, to different political groups. And it was an in-person event. It's very important to say that it was an in-person event where citizens had the opportunity to talk with these members of the Parliament and share their experience. And well, they both take part of this. The President of the government himself promised the Assembly that he will come back to the government feedback on the recommendations within a year. So they have been under a study as today, as I already said, and we are working in progress to respond to the Assembly these recommendations they already sent.
So can I just ask, let's just explore both of those a bit. So what's actually happened in Parliament since so did Parliament, I mean, you said there was a meeting between Assembly members and parliamentarians, but has there been is Parliament reviewing the process in any way? Is it reviewing the
not
response?
not the process itself, but the recommendations. They receive them, and they are being under a study of the commissions of people responsible of the Commission of Transition, ecological transition, and the politicals are studying these recommendations as
so
well.
The specific committee that is responsible for
there are specific, exactly, there are specific committees in the parliament, so all the politicals have set up and distribute the topics they are experts on, and they are the commission that have the most experienced people on this topic are studying these recommendations.
So can we expect a formal response from that group at some point, do you think?
Well, the response we can expect is what the president said, that it's in a year from the recommendations were just bring to the government. It's what we can expect for now.
So that's from the government. So okay. So from the government, is a promise that within a year there'll be a response to this.
Yes.
And so you talked about how I'm just kind of I'm a bit of a nerd about what the civil service is actually, the civil servants are actually doing at the moment. So you've now got an internal process of review where you're mapping these against your existing commitments, I assume. Now, there's always an issue where, you know, there's a big commitment to this from your particular ministry, but you're now dealing with other ministries who haven't been so involved. So how are you managing that process, or how is that process being managed? Because that's always challenging.
It's always challenging, and it's always something that we already don't know how it's taking part, because we are part of a Biodiversity Foundation. We need not inside of this process, because it's, as you already said, civil servants process, and we are not civil servants in our own, so we don't know exactly how they are just analyzing these recommendations and how they will come up with a resolution of this analysis. But we can say that it's following the process that the recommendations were presented. The presentation was in the government and in the parliament, and this is the study that the ministry is doing and sharing with all the other ministries. It's already started.
Okay, and we can expect by May next year to have actually got an official. Yes, hope so. Fingers crossed.
Hope so. Fingers crossed. Exactly. So you never know. A pandemic has just occurred, so you never know how these things go.
It was one of the things I was going to ask Ava, who couldn't join us on the call, about the role that some of the NGOs might be playing in trying to make sure this happens and scrutinizing it, but we can develop this as we carry on. So my last question for you, I mean, you said you were on a background role, but you watched the process unfold over time. So I'm kind of interested, what was your highlight of the whole process?
Well, I was kind of surprised and amused and overwhelmed, because the Assembly has shown that the Spanish society has, and that ordinary people are able to tackling complex problems and coming up with practical solutions. I will highlight the tolerance, generous and constructive proposals they have done, and the way they have behave themselves in this very hard and strong process they have been through. The respect as well. I think it was a successful experience, not for all of them, but for the people that had the opportunity to be in the background and see how they develop and become, they become and we become better because of them.
It's a very interesting thing you point to there about the citizens themselves kind of exceeded your expectations, that they kind of they were able to do things because you experienced that, but some of your colleagues who are now dealing with the recommendations, they haven't had that experience, you know what I mean? And it's a really difficult thing, isn't it? Because there is something transformational just both for the citizens and for and for public administrators and for people in your sort of position. And it's that question: if you don't experience it, do you really understand what you're receiving? It's a real challenge.
It's challenging, but I think the way they express themselves and when they present the recommendations, they transmit them as they feel them. And I think it's kind of the confidence, the way they do so. It's not that challenging at all. It's challenging at the beginning when you are just about to hear them or listen to them, and then you realize it's something they accomplished this very difficult task they were engaged.
Okay, Christina, I've got a couple of questions which have come into the chat, which is, I think it's useful just to ask you now, but just to clarify. So Ines, who was involved in the organization of the Austrian Assembly, is asked the question about whether you expect a formal response from Parliament. I think is it just from the committee or from Parliament, the whole of Parliament? Do you think you'll get a response?
We didn't expect a response. It was an official presentation to them, and it was to the Parliament. There were two presentations, and I said before, to the government, to the president, and then to the Parliament. In the Parliament were the people responsible for this institution and this commission, as I already said. And it's not the difference since other assemblies is that the mandatory of this assembly is that they had to present the recommendations and they were under studied, but there are nothing that they had to come up as something obligatory for the Parliament. I think it's a kind of a question that you were asking, no?
Okay, and so Parliament are under no obligation to provide a response. So, but the committee may respond to some of it. Okay. I realised that one of the questions went to me, not to you, which was a skeptical question of somebody in the audience who said that actually May is the month just before Parliament shuts down. It's just before the general elections, and that's a really bad time for to be released. I don't know if you've got anything to say about that, because
nothing to say, because it's well, maybe María José would say something that I've just said.
Maria, I'll come to you in a second, don't worry.
But just wanted to know.
Yes,
María José, please.
The general elections are in December, not in May.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say, that it's still time for that, even the bad time, but it's time for that. Thank you, María José.
That's fair enough. Look, Christina, thank you so much for your openness about the process and where we are and what's happening. I'm going to bring 3 other people in, but if you can stick around, we'll bring you back into the panel at the end when we've got questions. So, Chris, thank you for that, Christina.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to bring in Leire, Maria, and Conchi to talk a bit more about the actual practice of doing an assembly and being part of the organization of the assembly. So I'm just waiting for Maria and for Conchi. And please do keep your questions coming. That's great, or your comments. So my first thing I want to say to the 3 of you is congratulations, because it is a really challenging thing to deliver something like this, and so it's remarkable. Anyone who's actually done it, it's remarkable. So congratulations on that one. I want to make that sure. And I'm going to ask some challenging and difficult questions, but they come from a position of respect for having done what you've done. It's absolutely nothing personal. And I remember meeting 1 or 2 of you just before you started, and you look very scared. So actually, it's really nice to see you come out the other end of it. So let me just understand a little bit about, and Maria, maybe you could start on this one, about the just to clarify for people about the governance of the process, because we've been looking in Knoca at different governance structures. Some of them where it's the government itself which provides the secretariat, which has happened in Scotland. And in Ireland, and others where the there's a governance committee created, which has all these different interest groups and interests in it, like in France. But yours was closer to the other model, which is the third model, which is where the government, the commissioning authority basically gives the assembly organization to a group of organization, an organization or a group of organizations to run. And I understand that yourself and I've forgotten the name now, the
SDSN, it's mine. Yes.
Yes, the Spanish Network for Sustainable Development, thanks.
Yeah.
Were, if you like, the coordinating panel for this and the coordinating group. Can you just tell us a little bit about how that worked and what other groups you had around you to help you deliver this?
Yes, I mean, we were approached by the government initially also to help to have an assessment of different assemblies and to understand. And this was done together with REDS. So we did an assessment and we say, okay, this is the models that are out there. Given our circumstances, we could do this model, right? So that was the way we started. And then we became the coordination panel of the assembly. The structure of the assembly was set in a ministerial order. That was also consulted, so there was a period of consultations where the structure was also receiving comments from society, and some of the comments were incorporated later on in the final ministerial order that launched the assembly. So within there, the coordination panel was REDS and BC3. Why REDS and BC3? Well, because we had complementary skills. BC3 is a more research institution, and REDS is more a social sustainable development network, which they thought was quite convenient to combine the two types of skills. In the ministerial order, it was established also that there will be an independent expert group of experts, and the facilitation team, communication team, and then an independent selection of members of the assembly. So that was more or less the governance structure of the assembly. The minister provided backstage support, which we call it secretarial, but maybe it was not the same secretarial support than in other assemblies. It was more like what Christina described. But it was quite helpful to ensure that we were all well connected and that we had the means to connect them ourselves. The group of experts, there were consultations about nominations by different stakeholders groups, including political parties, parliament, and other key stakeholder groups, including NGOs, etc. And the idea, because it was a bit of confusion. It was at the beginning, some groups interpreted that it was an academic group of experts, but that was not the intention. The intention was to have a multidisciplinary, broad type of knowledge within the expert group. So there were people from the private sector, it was people from the NGO world, it was academic people, from labor, so that we could sort of cover all the aspects of the citizens' life and in relation to climate change. It worked quite well. We supported as a coordination panel the connections between the different elements, and there were regular meetings with the experts themselves. They selected 2 co-chairs from the beginning and settled the rules and modalities of operation also at the beginning, so that there was a clear role of the group of experts. This was also consulted later on with the facilitating group, and there was a clear establishment of the roles of each of the moving pieces of the assembly. So the experts, the facilitation, the communication, the support of the ministry, and so on, so that the citizens were quite clear about what each one was doing. And I have to say that, well, in general, it worked quite well. You know, I was more terrified about the experts than the citizens, I have to say, because it was a very broad and complex question. So transfer enough knowledge to really, address this question to citizens that they have very different levels of understanding of the problem. It was a real challenge, at least for me.
Okay, I'm going to ask Conchi about that in a minute, because she was the one who had to facilitate that. So one thing I wanted to ask you and Leire was about, so the question of your role as a coordinating panel, but you're also kind of committed to climate change and a sustainable development. It's kind of interesting that most of the people who have organized these things have been professional organizers of deliberative processes, so not necessarily involved in climate. And I think this is the first assembly we've seen where the organizers themselves, if you like, the coordinators of it, come from a climate background, come from a commitment to sustainable development. And I'm wondering whether you feel, from looking from the outside, some people might say, well, that's not independent, that's biased, because that's a group, you know, you've got two organizations at the center of it who have got a kind of commitment to this agenda. Do you understand what I mean? I just wonder how you respond to that. Leire, do you want to say something, or Maria? I don't know who wants to respond first.
Yeah, maybe I can go. I can only speak for my organization, but we basically act as a network in Spain, and we connect academic knowledge to practical solutions related to sustainable development. So our expertise is not on a specific agenda, although we do try to implement the SDGs and 2030 agenda, but it's so general and it doesn't have like any political aspiration. It's just very transversal, and you can put in sustainable development anything that you want, basically. So we are experts in getting technical knowledge and applying it into the project management of initiatives that contribute to sustainable development. So I think we were identified as an interesting organization for the coordination panel because of this, not because of our connections or our political agenda or any other kind of agenda. We are very transversal and we are a network. So all of the voices are heard within REDS.
Okay, Maria, do you have any thoughts? I mean, I'm just wondering whether or not.
Yes, I guess.
Were you actually criticised about this at all in the? I just have no idea about in the press.
No,
okay.
As far as I know, not in Spain. I mean, I mean, BC3 is obviously by name. You clearly identify us with climate change, but we also use participatory processes. We didn't have very much experience on deliberative processes, but that was not the aim of the panel. I mean. The deliberations and the methodologies were more into the facilitating part of the assembly. I guess the role of BC3 was more to ensure that that the expert group was well connected with the rest of the pieces there. And we didn't intervene, I think, nor ourselves into the themes or anything like that. It was the expert group who decided on the themes.
Okay, I just raised it because it was kind of when I was summarizing the assemblies, it was kind of quite noticeable that you were a kind of coming from the climate world or from the sustainable development world compared to coming from the deliberative world. I just think it's kind of interesting. It's a sort of interesting development. So that's really good. And I'm assuming you now think deliberation is definitely worth doing. So that's the.
We are doing now some, yeah.
And just a quick question about the process of selecting members. You didn't use when you were selecting members, you didn't use climate attitude as one of the selection criteria, I think. Is that right, or you did use it?
No.
Was there a decision why not to?
Yeah, Conchi can elaborate on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Maybe I can.
Yes,
yeah, well, although I'm not part of the independent entity that made the selection process, I can answer from the information that we have as part of the process. And the criteria that were selected for the sample, for the certification of the sample, I'm gonna check that I say them all the criteria, so just 1 second, were age, gender, educational level, geographical origin, like autonomous communities, population size, urban, rural, municipalities, income level, and nationality, like origin. And attitude was not taken into consideration for the certification process, although they had information from the online form that they sent to 20,000 contacts in their database. They had information about their attitude towards climate change. So they just had that information to have it as part of the information that they had about the sample, but it was not a criteria for
it's quite interesting that in 2 or 3 assemblies they've decided to use that to make sure that they have a sample that kind of that isn't seen as climate positive or climate skeptical or whatever. So it's quite interesting that you decided not to use that. Oh, by the way, Tila from Estonia has said she's from a very positive pro-climate background, and they organize climate assemblies, so there's no problem. So that's, you know, she's making the point that you're not alone on that. I was just kind of interested in seeing whether it was an issue, but clearly it hasn't been in Spain, so that's good. So thanks for that, Conchi. You mentioned it came from a panel. This is a bit unusual, actually. You didn't send out letters to the population. You just used an existing panel from
the independent entity that made the selection process counted on a big database, like 20,000 people in the database that was made for all kind of studies, like social studies, environmental studies, demographic studies, like all sorts of sociological studies. So they use this big database for getting the sample.
And was that a decision that was made because it was a sort of more pragmatic decision? Because, you know, most other assemblies have sort of sent out letters to general population or used random telephone. Was this a sort of pragmatic resource decision, or was it?
Well, I was not part of the process at that moment, so I cannot answer. I think maybe Cristina or María José, that they were already in that part of the process. Maybe they can answer.
I can answer. I can answer a bit. It was for practical reasons, because there were several possibilities being considered. One was to use the census, but for that it was a need of permission of the parliament, which will take 1 year, and therefore we decided to go for a tender. Of a company that could select the citizens, and they won the tender, so they made this proposal based on the databases they had. They extended what they had already with some phone calls to extra citizens, so it was kind of large.
Okay.
And they had, as Conchi said, they had a lot of, the databases were mixed, so there was all sorts of questionnaires about consumption, about many things that were not related necessarily to climate change nor to sustainability necessarily. So
yeah, okay, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, I was involved in an assembly early on in the UK where we used the panel of a polling company to generate a similar kind of thing, and it was a much more pragmatic thing to do. Of course, what it means is that not everybody, you know, it's only those people on the panel who get a chance to participate. But you know, so it's a kind of, it's always a difficult decision about which approach you take. I think that makes sense.
What it was done afterwards was that the profiles that ended up in the selection was compared with the national statistics.
Yeah.
To see if it was matching at least the national profile of citizens, and it was quite matching.
Yeah, no, I saw that. That was impressive. Absolutely. So you broke the assembly into. No, I mean, you've got a huge topic. I mean, you've actually got a topic which goes mitigation and adaptation. We're going to try and do everything, which is kind of, you know, that's probably the most extensive assembly I've seen. All of the others have been incredibly comprehensive, but yours pushes it even further. But if I'm right, there was a process by which the public could get involved in helping to think about the themes. So the themes were set by the independent expert group, but actually the public could be involved. I don't know who would like to explain to me how that happened. Leire.
Yeah, maybe I could elaborate on that. So the process to select the topics that were discussed at the assembly could be summarized in more or less like 5 steps. The first one was a research where we benefited from this network and analyzed the topics that were discussed in other assemblies like the UK, France, Scotland, Ireland. And then we also compared or extracted the topics that were discussed in the climate and energy transition law. And we also did different multi-stakeholder consultations where we gather other topics. After this first period of research, then we used the group of stakeholders. We had a community of 70 stakeholders that were helping the Assembly in the preliminary process. And we did a consultation with this group of stakeholders. We did first a questionnaire where they could add more topics. And then we did a second questionnaire where they prioritized the topics that were elaborated in the research phase and that they also included in the first questionnaire. With that information, we presented all of the results to the independent group of experts, and then they made some selections, and we then made an open consultation to the whole Spanish society through the website, and we gathered all of the responses of prioritization and other topics. And with that information, we presented again the results to the group of independent experts who then decided the final selection of topics. And then we then put the topics into the areas of life.
And this is, I think I've got consumption, food and land use, work, community health and care, and ecosystems. Those were that's the 5. Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so I'm now going to turn to Conchi, because suddenly you've got this, you've got 100 participants, you've got 5 work streams. You know, you, like other assemblies, you spend some time with the whole assembly learning about climate change. And then because you've got such a big topic, you start breaking them up into 5 groups to work on these. Yeah. And then the challenge comes that you've got these people who have been working for on these 5 themes, and the other people haven't been working on them. And so I'm kind of interested in 2 things here. One is how did you manage that process of, you know, citizens becoming specialized, but making sure the other citizens knew what was happening? And how did you kind of like what was your process of recommendations going from these small groups into the bigger plenary? And then the second question I've got is about the relationship with experts, but let's go for this first. I won't ask you too many questions at once. How did you manage this big space? Because it's always a challenge to develop recommendations in small groups and actually have the bigger group understand what's happening, especially with 172 recommendations.
Yeah, and they were more. they just got reduced into 172. But yeah, okay. So I think it's important just to first say that the areas of life and society, they were discussed with the citizens. So there was this proposal of these areas based on other assemblies and based on the discussions that were within the experts, and a proposal was presented to the citizens, and that proposal was discussed. So they were really involved in the process of understanding the areas of life and society and giving content to them, no, like really acknowledging what they were about and all this. So I think that process of discussion that was made among all, like the 100 people divided in groups of 10, okay? But all the 100 were discussing about the areas of life and what they all implied and all this. So I think that was a very important step. And then when they were divided, we made sure that this mini Spain criteria was also distributed among the areas of life, so that we had this diversity. So the areas of life were not selected by choice, let's say, but they were also randomly organized. So with the stratification. So we had all these areas, and they were well, we made sure that along the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th session, like among all of them, there were moments of giving information to the 100 in the session and among sessions through the platforms, through the online platform. We had an online platform called Decidim. And in the online platform, we were having all the discussions about the proposals. Even citizens could add proposals to areas of life and society that they were not in those areas, but they could add proposals in the platform, and those proposals were made, like were taken to the area of life to the other citizens, and sometimes even we invited those citizens to explain their proposal in the group. So we had a lot of different dynamics of coming back and forwards between the small groups and the big group to make sure that they all understood, even though before the extra session that they voted to have an extra session, and that session was in person, so face to face. I think that's like, for me, that's a highlight of the process, that they agreed on having that extra session. And just before that, they had all the recommendations, they had them explained, and so they could also ask about questions about all the recommendations to the different groups of areas of life and society.
But I forgot to say,
I could say many things. I could say many things. But let's say that in the details, we made a lot of these minor things to make sure that they all really know the recommendations and own them, and they can vote them from that knowledge.
And I forgot to say early on that most of this is happening online, isn't it? It's not.
Yeah.
This is really important. It's something I can't believe I didn't say it at the start. Is apart from the final weekend, all of this is happening online.
Yes.
All of this is happening through use of Zoom and various other technologies, I assume.
Yeah, well, basically the online connection was through Zoom. Then we had different types of surveys and different types of boards, online boards to stick things and move things. Yeah.
So what's interesting about what you were saying there is this idea that, a particular idea that people in other groups could make suggestions to and in a funny kind of way, it's that they almost became like advocates and kind of like almost inverted commas kind of sort of external specialists specialists for that group of. That's really interesting, because I haven't necessarily seen that before.
Yeah.
And so it might just while we're thinking about the online part of it, it must have been really amazing when they all met first face to face.
It was one of the moments that a lot of them highlight as one of the best moments, when they saw each other in person, face to face, and
they realize they're not just a box.
Yeah. But just one thing about the advocates, for me, it was very impressive also how we made, before the votation, we made a poll, like a previous online poll, to make sure that the recommendations were aligned, like to check what was the kind of the level of support that they had, and if they didn't reach a good level of support, why. So people could explain in the poll why. And for me, it was very impressive in that moment. 2 people from each area of life had to explain the proposals in 10 minutes maximum, like 5 to 10 minutes. They had to explain all the proposals, really addressing the things that had been hotspots or really difficult to reach in the areas of life, and that they were aware that the rest of the citizens were going to need like an extra explanation of those proposals. And that moment was really amazing. They were like experts explaining their proposals and really addressing like these difficult words or this key learning that they had about the areas of life and society.
And you said there were actually more recommendations. So what was required? What level of support was required for a recommendation?
No, there were more before the final votation, but they were able to merge them to reduce them a little bit. But yeah. No. All of them went ahead. Yeah, they went 172 with more of 80% of support.
Okay, because we're in the learning call we had last week on Austria. They used a process of sociocracy where they actually needed to get consensus within the working groups in order for it to get to the plenary. You didn't have that. You actually allowed there to be disagreement and it come to the plenary.
Yeah, we allowed to have this agreement. We aim to have really proposals that were elaborated by the group, like I think most of the groups were working in the base of that everyone in the group could support that proposal was there for a purpose, let's say. no, that it has sense that proposal, so that even if they could not vote on favor, they could understand that proposal was part of the recommendations. So basically that was like the spirit and the aim in the way of building the proposals. And yeah, so it was not consensus and it was not sociocracy, but it was like based on that kind of a spirit. Yeah.
Okay, no, I understand. And I'm going back to now, well, Maria was saying she was scared of the independent expert group. I'm kind of interested about your how you manage that relationship between experts giving evidence and I'm assuming being asked by the citizens to come and explain things, etc. You know, so how did you manage that relationship? Because that can be quite difficult.
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to commend that the group of experts were very committed. They were gaining in enthusiasm from session to session, really. It was contagious in a way, well, the most difficult were the initial learning sessions, because it was difficult to select which knowledge to provide them, not understanding the reactions or not understanding the level they may have. So it was assumed that they had no knowledge. And the first two sessions were quite difficult, I would say, because there was a lot of knowledge pulled into the citizens. But in general, it went well. The citizens reacted quite well to that. What we basically did was, because it was online, we decided to ask the experts to pre-tape the presentations, so that you know, it was a clear language, and then it was not a lot of technical stuff there that they could not understand and so on. So we helped them on that. And I have to say they did a very good job on that. And then they were accessible during the session for questions or for feedback. And one interesting thing that happened, my view, was that the citizens were really pleased to have experts accessible for questions. So they insisted that they should be there all the time, waiting for their questions. And the experts were quite happy to do so. So there was an intense also work in between sessions to prepare the sessions with the facilitation team. So the experts were really committed also to do this transfer in a way that was you know, guided a bit by the team of Conchi, no, that it was not overwhelming to the citizens, and also we were worried about the fact that we could trigger some sort of fatigue or sensation of not being possible. And so that was managed in the discussions with the experts as well, not to be overwhelming the citizens. And I have to say that most of the experts also said that they learn a lot from the citizens.
Yeah.
And that was, I think there was a very good, because it was given and taken all the time from citizens to experts. So there was a very nice relationship established at the end of the assembly, and they still have relations with the experts. They still call experts when they have a question, because they created this network now, this WhatsApp network, and they still have some experts on the network calling them for information. So
that's really,
it was a quite pleasant thing. I think I guess the initial discussions were the most difficult, because the experts wanted to say everything, you know, the more the better, no? So it was difficult to say, okay, how we channel that in a way that it doesn't overwhelm the citizens. But then the citizens made more than 470 questions that the experts have to answer also in written. So it was a kind of, we also asked the experts to produce on issues that were frequently asked, or they were, we detected that they were interested. We made the experts also to produce fact sheets that they could be shared in the platform, in the CTM, so that they will have access to information there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's interesting. The Scottish Assembly actually said, because they were the first ones really to do an assembly online, and they were saying that they found that because people had to do videos, experts had to do videos, they were actually able to kind of like manage that process much better than you would do if you were doing it in real life, because you could send the video back and say, could you do this again? You know, it's kind of like That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
They were more experts than the group, because sometimes the group of experts were asking external experts for things which were more complicated, or they don't have enough expertise. And those were also very well received. I remember there were some questions about fiscal issues that are not easy to explain. We got some experts there, and they were explaining things in a way that the citizens really, they were very satisfied on the explanations.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The other thing that Scotland said, and I'm sure it's true for you, is being online actually made it easier for you could bring experts in from all sorts of places. Whereas trying to get everybody to Madrid is not always, well, wherever you are, isn't it? It's not so.
Yeah, that's true for the Spanish also, because we could have more experts. Which led us to think that even if we will have to have something in person in the future, you maybe could work on hybrid, so that you can bring some experts through.
I can remember doing a face-to-face assembly years ago where we actually had an expert on a computer, which we moved around the tables. Literally, it's kind of like, that you can do it. You can do it. We seemed strange then, but now it seems normal. Leire, can you tell us a little bit about the communication that's been happening around the assembly, and maybe after? I understand that you've been doing almost like road shows around the country with some of the participants. Is that right?
Yeah, I think there are two main parts of the communication of the assembly. The first one being during, and the second one after. And they're very different, because the first one, during the assembly, it was agreed that the process, the discussions that the citizens had during the sessions, and also the identity of the citizens would be confidential, to protect that independence and neutrality and objectivity of the assembly, and also to protect the citizens from any unwanted contacts, and to make them feel safer, and to be able to participate freely in those debates. So all of the other information of the assembly was published on the website. As they said, also the videos of the content, the agendas for each of the sessions, all of any other type of information about the assembly was published on the website to ensure that transparency. But there was a clear decision on the confidentiality of the discussions and the citizens. So the communication during was not as well received as we hoped for, because there was not as much interest on the theory of the process and the content that was created. But I think it was a key ingredient also to ensure that the citizens felt a sense of community during the sessions. I think being online, like an assembly online, and having people that you'd only see like through the box, I really think that it was a key ingredient to make them feel safe and to say whatever they wanted, that to not feel judged, and to create that sense of community between them. That's why they were so happy in the in-person session, that they recognized each other, and they could see them, and the contrast of, oh, I thought that you were taller or shorter. So it was hilarious to see it in person, but because they had already created a bond during the sessions online. After, I think it's important to say that the citizens in the last session, the in-person session, they decided what they wanted to do with the confidentiality of the process. So they themselves chose if they were going to go public, how much information it was going to share with the world, or how much privacy they wanted to keep for themselves. And on top of that, they also recognized the limitations of having such a safeguarded process in regards to their work being known with different stakeholders or administration. So they also decided, and this was not planned at all, like it all came from them. They decided to do kind of a communication plan to present the recommendations to different stakeholders. And that's what we're doing now in the after part of the assembly. And they also decided how to organize themselves, meaning that they chose type of spokespeople. So 2 per area of life and society, and a few others that were transversal, because there were also transversal topics like education and whatever. So they were specific to each area of life, and also transversal topics. And they chose those spokespeople to be the ones to present the recommendations to the president of the government, or to answer to any press that came up after the session. And they also decided to organize themselves based on geographic leadership. Since there are several citizens from each autonomous community, they decided a leader per autonomous community that would be the responsible one to communicate anything happening in that region to the rest of the citizens. Because I still don't have the information of the citizens. I am organizing all of these events with autonomous communities without the email or the phone number or even the full name of the citizens. I still don't have that information. So it's very guarded, and they've decided who they share their information with, and it's clearly not the organization of the assembly. So it comes organically. So it's very structured, the geographic leadership and the sharing of information, and it was their choice. So we're really respecting that.
So is there a formal association? This is actually a question that was asked by Ines actually on the chat. Is there a formal association of the former members, or are they doing this kind of like organically and informally?
Well, maybe it's interesting to also explain the process, because what happened was that we saw them so active that the resources were extended for supporting them a bit more until they could become self-organized. So there has been an extended support for communication and for organization until the end of the year. And now they are debating about if they should or not be in association. They are exploring all the paperwork already and everything else. But what is very interesting is that they are starting to be self-organized. So they are creating commissions based on their respective skills. For example, IT, for the ones that are more in IT and communication, they will work on a web page. The ones that are more on other topics. So they are creating these commissions to continue the legacy of the Assembly. And they will decide if they constitute an association or not. But it seems that they are very pro doing something like that.
Okay. And so and you've been, just to clarify, Leire, you've been sort of helping these people who can't communicate actually go around different places around to meet municipalities, to meet groups. Who have they been meeting with?
Yeah, so our extended support with the citizens, it was like through the implementation of this communication plan. But I think first I would say that an added value of the organization of the Assembly being conformed by different organizations meant that now we are, each of us, based on our expertise, helping the citizens on something specific of the aftermath of the Assembly. So for example, since my organization is an expert on networks and creating events and facilitating all of this, we have taken charge of the implementation of this communication plan. Conchi's team, since they are experts on facilitating the decisions and collective intelligence, they're helping the citizens decide what to do with this group that has been created. And so we're, each of us, based on our expertise, we're helping and giving our support to the citizens based on our added value. So I think that's also a very good coordination of the coordination panel after the Assembly, after the project. And regarding the communication plan, they decided to, of course, do the presentation to the President of the government and also to the Congress, as it was discussed before. They also decided to have in-person meetings with all of the governments of the autonomous communities. So the highest political representative that we could aim for. And then they also decided to do virtual presentations of the recommendations to the different sectors of society. So third sector, NGOs, etc., the trade union sector, private sector, and then academic sector. Those are the 4 online events that we are organizing. And they also decided to do a final presentation to the National Federation for the Local Governments to then land the recommendations at a local government, not also regional, but then local. And we are in the process of implementing that. We already have done the event with the third sector, so all the associations and the organizations that work on these topics. And some other collaborations have come up after or like through that event, like an event that happened last week only with one of the citizens that went to Granada for another event. So like collaborations are coming up thanks to these events and thanks to the proactiveness of all the citizens. And for the regional governments, we've already done 6, and we are planning, we already have scheduled another, I think it's 5 for the next 2 or 3 weeks. So I think we're gonna reach all of the regional governments, which is quite a success.
I've just had a question, which I'll just quickly jump in on, because I think I know the answer actually, about who's covering the costs of this communication plan. It's not the government. It's actually being funded by the European Climate Foundation. Is that right?
Yes, so my organization decided to seek external financial support for the first part of the project, so the formal assembly. And then after that finished, we submitted another project, like the second project, this socialization of the recommendations to the European Climate Foundation.
Okay.
Yes, I guess to clarify that the coordination panel didn't receive support from the government.
Okay, so you were funded by both of you were funded by the European Climate Foundation.
Either our own resources or a grant from the European Climate Foundation.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that helps.
We wanted to be completely neutral with respect to resources to the government.
So before I open up for some more general questions, I just want to ask you the highlight of the assembly for you. So Conchi, what was your highlight? If you can imagine, is there one highlight?
Well, it's like I don't know. It's like I don't know how to say it, but a lot of highlight moments I can say. But if I have to pick one, I'm gonna choose the one that all the citizens, or at least most of them, speak about the moment of the votation, when we decided to go for the in-person votation also. Like we made it by hand. That was like a whole decision process also to make that decision. But the moment that that we had the results and the whole organization of how to make that transparent, and that they had a very active role in it, and all the key roles of the process were embedded in the process of seeking the votes and all this, that was the moment of the final moment. Like all the recommendations, 172 had more than 80% of support, and they all stand up and cried. Many people were crying and clapping, and that was like, I was crying too. Like we were like, I think that moment, yeah.
Okay, you're gonna get me going in a second. Hang on a second. Okay.
yeah. We were like this, of course. Yeah.
Maria, what was your highlight?
Well, it was the same than Conchi, but I had another one which was also very. I was also crying there. Was when they were selecting the spokespersons. I mean, it was an amazing moment where they recognized the different skills of each one. It was a tremendous respect. I mean, it was I still think on this moment, and I still will be able to cry. No, it showed that they were human beings, that they were respecting each other, that they didn't look into the differences they had, but rather into the commonalities and the capacity to do something collectively. I think that was a very, very high moment for me.
Okay, that's really, really great. And Leire, have you got any additional moment have we got another moment where you cried and everything?
We did. We cried many times, but any moment with the citizens has been a highlight. I think any people now that in this socialization plan and they're getting to meet the citizens, they now they understand why we were so hyped up and why we were crying at every from the effort of creating this project, and then also having the satisfaction of everything they accomplished. But for me, I think now that I'm more in contact with the citizens through all of these meetings, it's incredible to see the empathy that they have, and how they are still, after months after the process has ended, how they still feel so passionate about the work that they did, how it has changed them, how it's had like a real effect on their lives, the people that in their communities, how they are becoming kind of ambassadors of climate change, and how also they are interacting with the politicians, and how they empathize and demand things to their local politicians, and those interactions are honestly incredible to witness. So any meeting with them, it's a highlight. But I'm quite enjoying this plan, even though it's quite an effort, but it's very inspiring, I would say.
Very, very rewarding, it sounds like. Yeah.
We also had down moments, right?
Yeah, crying from happiness.
I saw the question. Yeah. I saw the question in the chat. I think maybe we have to address that.
I was just going to bring two or three. What I was going to do is, just so people didn't listen to me all the time, I was going to bring a couple of people in to ask some questions, and then we'll answer them. But I thought we could bring Christina. Can we bring Christina back, because she may want to contribute to these other questions? So I've got 3 questions which I'd like to ask. So we'll take the questions and then get the answers from them. So the first one was from Janos, who wanted to ask about the explanations. Janos, are you happy to just ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Hi to everyone. Hearing about how the citizens explained their recommendations to their peers was very inspiring. And I was wondering whether they get opportunities to do the same for policymakers. So explain to them what the reasonings behind the recommendations are.
Okay.
Maybe I can take that.
Yeah, well,
or are we taking several? Okay.
Yeah. Just in case. Joanne, do you want to come in with your question?
Yep. Hi, hello. I was curious because I couldn't find any information about reactions of the major opposition party, the Partido Popular. I mean, has it been any formally, informally, through spokesmen, through the party, through the parliament?
Okay, thanks, Joanne. And Katharina, you wanted to get away from the happy moments and ask about something else, I think.
Yes, the whole journey has sounded so inspiring and so and also a rewarding process. But as someone who has also organized these processes myself, I know there are always challenges, and I would like to know what were the biggest challenges that you experienced. Thanks. Okay, and there's one other one that's come in, which is from Laurie, who's being very politically pragmatic. So do you want to come in and ask about this one, Laurie?
Yeah, sure. Apologies if this has been hit on because I was late joining. How convinced is the organizing group that the Assembly's recommendations will actually be acted on and not, buried by politician and vested interest, which we've seen in, many other citizens' assemblies?
Thanks for that. Thanks for that one. So we've got 4 questions. One about do the politicians have access to the explanations around the recommendations? One about reactions of opposition parties, one about the challenges you faced, and one about how serious do you think are you worried about the follow-up, basically? So on the explanation, so Conchi and Leire, I'm sure there's two sort of combination here. Conchi, when the actual recommendations are put into the report, are there explanations about why? Is there a rationale behind the recommendations as well?
There's a short description, and in that short description, some of the key reasons are there. But Leire is organizing most of the events where they present the recommendations, so I think she can add a lot of how they explain. Okay. So Leire, do you want to give us some insights into that?
Yeah, so the basic structure for the meetings that we're doing with the regional governments follow the same one that Conchi explained before, of having at least one representative of each area of life in that meeting, whether in person or online, to explain or to present each area of life and its recommendations to the politicians from the regional government. So we do a round of presentations where they get to say what they meant with all of those recommendations. They don't get to explain in detail each of them, because in 1 hour of meeting we don't have the time to do 172 explanations, but they do select the ones that they feel are most relevant for the environmental situation in that autonomous community. And after that, we give space to the politicians to react and to comment and to ask questions. And most of the time, like in most of the meetings, it's usually 1 hour, but it goes further than that. It's more or less 1 hour and a half, because the politicians really start to have a conversation with the citizens and to elaborate on how they decided this, or how did they manage to get an agreement, like such a high agreement on like a specific recommendation that they are having trouble with, or that there's not a lot of political support with. So they really do get into conversations with the citizens and they explain the debates that happen inside of the sessions, and they explain how they came to agreements, and how they empathize, as I said before, with the situation of the politicians, their personal responsibility, and all of the other stakeholders or sectors that are responsible for creating a solution.
Janos, is just to follow up, do you think that exchange actually increased politicians' trust in the recommendations and in the Assembly? Do you think that's actually an important exchange?
Yes, 100%. And I know for a fact that some of the politicians that have met the citizens in their autonomous community have exchanged contact with them, and they want to keep in touch, and they want to get to know them more, because these meetings have a double purpose. The first one being presenting the recommendations, but then a second one, and I think one of the most important ones, is showcasing how important these processes are, and how important it is to replicate it at a regional level, because Spain has a massive biodiversity and very different political and geographical situation. So it's important to replicate the National Assembly to the problematics of each region. So we are trying to convey the massive change that the citizens have experienced through this process, and to kind of help the regional governments take a decision of replicating it in their autonomous community. And we've already seen that happening in some of them. So we do see that the meeting the citizens is very beneficial for.
I think this is the kind of thing that I was saying to Christina earlier, is this issue of the recommendations and the report can be rather dry, and actually it's almost this personal experience of interacting with the Assembly that is absolutely critical, whether that's of organisers, whether it's of experts, whether it's of politicians. And that's the thing that's really hard to generalize, to get how do you bring the critical people into this space is really hard, because, as I say, we know it can be transformational, but it's not transformational to receive the report. It's kind of I think that's something we really haven't worked out how to scale this kind of experience up, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I think events and events and events.
I think which is interesting is that they are the ones also translating that into smaller governance scales, like the schools, their towns, mayors. So there's many of them that they're already, moving themselves into these spaces of smaller communities around themselves, and sharing this experience and the recommendations.
Okay,
so that's also quite.
Yeah. So actually, in that we might be able to respond a bit to Joanne's question, which was about the opposition parties. I mean, there is always a danger when this sort of process is run that it's seen as the belonging to the governing parties. So what's the response been of has there been a response at all? Has there been a response from parties that aren't in government?
Well, I guess the point here is that was one of the concerns when the assembly was launched, that we didn't want that was attributed to a particular party in the government. And that was the reason why also to be anonymous and to talk about the process. But it was very important at the beginning, and we were criticized that the communication was not, enough. But we had this fear that it could be sort of politicized and attributed to the party in the government or the coalition in the government, which will be a disaster from the beginning. So the reactions of the parties, there were not many reactions of the parties. The right-wing parties, they didn't say much, not for good, not for bad. I mean,
so have you had any experience in the regions or the localities with those opposition parties at all? Have they been more open at that level or not particularly?
So we did, how can I explain this? Depending on the regional government and the political party governing in that government, we more or less estimated how many meetings we would have in the 17 regional communities. Like we estimated, okay, if we reach 10, we've done a good job. We are exceeding that. So I think it's more like a domino effect, because they start to see that all of the other regional communities are receiving us. Also the president and the different more events. It's becoming more of they want to get to know the citizens, and it's also interesting to see how they explain the climate crisis in their own words and the recommendations. And once you get to know the citizens and hear them speak, you don't get a feeling that they are from one political party or another. Like that becomes very clear very fast. Like they're not affiliated to any kind of party when they speak about the assembly. So that impartiality or neutrality has I think has been a key in reaching other autonomous communities that we were not really sure that they would welcome us.
Okay. And I was going to ask, we've got this question about, I was talking about what your highlight was, and Katrina decided that she would reverse that and say, what was your biggest challenge you faced in relation to it? So Christina, do you want to talk about the biggest challenge you faced during the process? I'll go around your.
Being in the backwards, it's the most difficult. Being just in the backstage, as I said before, is one of the most difficult things, just to give this independence we have been talking about. It's one of the biggest lead we had to do. Just let everything set up so the government was not involved at all. So the process was completely independent. It was very, very, very difficult and sad as well, because we already know how about the topics. We already know about a lot of things. We can participate as well, and being just giving up, the strings around us, like, no, don't participate, don't take a step forward, just lead, just provide everything they need, just give themselves what they need for this process to be clean, transparent, independent. It's not as easy as it seems. So for me, it's kind of this balance. It's very difficult, and I really think that we achieved that. So the people can be their own, and we have a very restrictive law related with the personal data. Just keep themselves in this law. Well, it has been quite hard.
That's right. Maria, what was your biggest challenge?
My biggest challenge is not to become a citizen myself in the assembly.
Not to get too involved.
Yeah, no, I guess also the biggest challenge was the starting point with the group of experts, so that they will understand that was not to show how much they knew on the topics, but rather to help the citizens to understand the topics. So, but that was alleviated after a couple of meetings, and after the second session, it was clear that it was going well. But initially, I was terrified about that. I had to admit it.
Okay, I can understand that. And Leire, what's your biggest challenge been, do you think?
I think maybe not as a challenge in a bad sense, but it's since so many organizations and so many stakeholders and so many citizens, it was just a massive amount of people and a massive network, getting to know and how to navigate the different roles that each of us had in all of that, while the project was transforming beyond what we organized in the beginning, and being up to speed with moving this massive project with so many people forwards, and having that organization structured and with clear roles, and that was time consuming, but in a happy way.
Okay. And I left you to last, Conchi, because you were you were the main interface with the citizens. So.
I really want to answer this one. So I'm gonna say, I have to say the three words that for me define the biggest challenge, which is accessibility, inclusion, and well-being, I would say, okay? Which are for us the three key ingredients that we have used for designing the facilitation process. And I would just explain some difficulties, just to illustrate some examples. We had a major technological gap. 22 people out of 100 connected in the previous session to learn how to turn on a computer, how to enter into a Zoom link. Some people didn't even have a computer or had an internet connection, so we had a major technological gap. So that was one thing. Then we had this purpose to really address the participation gap, being aware of the power dynamics that were happening, being aware of, well, you imagine all that happens when a group comes together. So we had to make sure that everyone participate in equal conditions, considering the diversity, and we had to make that online and with time pressure and all this. And then we had also into consideration the emotional impact that all the information was going to have on participants. So we even had phone calls every, let's say, 2 sessions, or sometimes between session and session, we had phone calls to really make a follow-up on what was happening. So I think that's been a massive work that we have been doing to really make sure that that participation was possible in the best conditions, considering the diversity of the group. So I think that with this time pressure, so the relief was when they approved one extra session, that was like, and then we had, oh my God, we have to organize these 100 people in one room with this diversity, and so all the other challenge that you imagine.
Okay. So. I'm gonna ask. That was very entertaining. The four your various comments were very. I want to end with Laurie's question about how serious a couple of questions, I guess. Do you worry about the follow-up? Do you worry that all this effort goes in and actually that we won't, how positive are you that there will be change based on the activity of the Assembly from where you're sitting now?
I can go first. I am not worried at all, because I already see the change. I see the change in them, and I see the change that they are creating in their network. So that changing 100 people's minds about climate change, and having 100 people that are truly informed and that have made themselves responsible of their recommendations, it's a huge impact. And I also know through the meetings with the regional governments that some of the regional governments are either in the process of elaborating strategies on climate change or similar documents, and they have used the recommendations of the citizens as like a contrast document to see if they were missing anything in their strategy, if they could implement anything else. So I know that there's also a direct impact and implementation of the recommendations at a political and public sphere. And then I also see the massive network of interest that the citizens are creating around other NGOs, organizations, groups, activists, other regional governments. They're going beyond what we expected, and they're becoming I don't know, a project that wants to be known, and other people are finding it very interesting, and other people are reading it. So the more people that read it, and the more they do, I think there's a clear impact.
Okay. Maria, did you want to say something?
If I can follow, yeah, well, I think, first of all, to say that the citizens develop the recommendations, and the recommendations are targeted to different people. So the government, the citizens themselves, the other organizations, the stakeholder groups. So they are aware of that there is a diversity of actors that will have to implement the recommendations. In the case of the government, I think one interesting thing that happened was that when the recommendations were shaped, and we could see them, it was clear that some of the recommendations are already ongoing, which is a very strong message to the government, saying you are not informing citizens enough on what you're doing. And that was a very important take-home message also for the government, I think. I am confident that many of the recommendations will be taken. I think some ministries are already reacting, even publicly. So I think not all, because there are 170, they are not all addressed to the government, but their citizens were aware of the competences of the different actors in terms of to whom the recommendations are addressed. So that's why Leire was saying that when they go to an autonomous community, they are aware more or less of that, what are the competences of the regional governments. So it was an effort at the end to really map a little bit by them who will be the target of the recommendation. But although all are being presented to all.
Okay.
So I'm confident that many of the recommendations will be taken on board. And I think some of the recommendations probably are already taken on board.
Okay. Christina, Conchi, did you want to jump in on that one?
I want to share that the recommendations were translated into the 4 official languages in Spain, which I think it's important because I didn't address this in the challenges, but it was also one of the challenges was considering our political context with the diversity of languages that we have, official languages. We had that into consideration in the design, and that was a challenge because there were not economic resources for that. But the facilitation team was diverse itself in languages, and we translated facilitators that could speak different official languages were translating when citizens were participating in their own mother tongue, so official language. So, and then the recommendations have been translated into 4 official languages. And I think that's important also as a message of where the recommendations are going to be, spreaded and read. And I think that's also important. So I just want to add that.
Did you want to add anything, Christina?
No, I just wanted to address that all the recommendations that are already ongoing, because it's what María José said, not most of them, but several of them are ongoing. It's also a good lead to the political decision maker that they are going through this citizens said, so they are just on the same road. It's a very good signal.
Okay. Okay, we're gonna have to leave it there. It's been a really interesting conversation. I actually want to apologise to a couple of people because I was hoping to bring in Lancho from Deliberativa and Eva, who's been involved with the Mallorca, with the Balearic Island Assembly, to talk about some of the local things that are happening in Spain. We're going to have to move that to another call. I'm really sorry about that. But this has been a really interesting call. I think one of the things that we would like to follow up, I think, with you and with others, is about this really interesting role of members after the assembly, because there's a really interesting question about, you know, kind of their role as a political actor. With some assemblies, everything stops immediately. The assembly stops. Here and in Austria and in France, they've become very politically active as a group, and I think that's something we really need to investigate and think through very carefully from some of the lessons that you've got there. So, in thanking Leire, Maria, Conchi, and Christina, it's been a really interesting call. I've learned a lot, and I've really enjoyed learning about what made them cry and what made them angry or frustrated. Thank you once again to everyone who's been involved, and to Stina and colleagues at DBT, Danish Board of Technology, for providing the technological support and facilitation for this. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I shall see you all. If I don't see you all before, have a good Christmas. I can't believe I just said that. It's November.